Barrick, and we're going to be looking at justice. Justice can be one of those words where we maybe don't quite understand what it means, or it sounds a bit jargony, and we're just a bit scared to unpack it a bit more. But hopefully, as a part of this Discipleship Toolkit session, we're going to be able to explore it and not be scared of it, but actually really encouraged by it. And how we're going to do that is in 3 parts. The first part we're going to do is we're going to look at what is God's justice. The second part is, through our understanding of that, how does that affect mission? And then thirdly, how does God's justice affect our day-to-day living as well? So, the first question, what is God's justice? Well, to understand a bit more about that, we need to go back to creation, and we need to see how God creates not just the whole world, but also how he creates humanity. He creates Adam and Eve different from everything else. He makes them in his image, and he treats them differently. Adam and Eve and all of humanity are equal in the eyes of God. The problem from the point of Adam and Eve eating the fruit and still today is that humanity are now able to redefine good and evil for themselves. And that's happened constantly all throughout history, from times within the Bible to modern history now. We see how people are mistreated, how they are vulnerable, and how there's just some really awful things happening. And that's a problem because all humanity, as I've said before, are created in God's image, and God views us all equally. So when it comes to justice, it's not quite the retribution style of justice, which is still important, where if somebody does something wrong, there is a punishment or something that they need to do, like what our legal system is based on. But this is more restorative. How do we restore those who have been downtrodden and those who are vulnerable back to the right place in society and in our lives as equal to us, as equal as they are in the eyes of God, but also honouring and showing the fact that we know that they are made in God's image as well. So when we maybe shift our focus and regard humanity as everyone being equal to ourselves and to one another, but also the fact that every human has the image of God within them, how does that affect mission? And that is number 2. What's important there is to ask the question, what is it that we understand of God's mission? It says in Matthew 28, when Jesus is ready to prepare the disciples, that they are to go out and to baptize the nations. And that is often seen as our mission as Christians or followers of Jesus, to go out and to tell and share that good news with the world around us. But also, something which we do as well, and what Jesus talks about as being 2 of the greatest commandments, is to love the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, mind and strength, and to love our neighbour as ourselves. These things are incredibly important, and I would say fairly fundamental to my faith and to Christian faith. So how does justice affect that? Well, if we view humanity as in every single person that we see, every single person that we know, regardless of if they have a faith or not, regardless of any other differences, as being made in the image of God and being made and regarded as equal to God as from one another, then that just makes God's mission so much more important. How we treat one another and how we show that respect to each other and that love to one another needs to drive us. How we regard the importance of doing God's work, not necessarily abroad, but in our own communities, in our own households. That person that we speak to, that every conversation is just hard work, they too are made in the image of God. So as we approach this mission and the sharing of the gospel, sharing that good news, Who we share it with and how we share it is really, really important. Everybody is equal, so therefore everybody deserves to hear it. It's not ours to keep and to pick and choose. But also there are some people out there that are really negatively affected by things that are out of their control. And how we treat those and how we make that a part of our mission is also super important. If I'm to love my neighbour, how do I do that? And what does that mean, not just in a grand scheme or under a title of mission, but actually in the day-to-day decisions that I make in my life? Number 3, how does God's justice impact our day-to-day living? I would say, personally, it would impact every aspect of our day-to-day lives, because our day-to-day living and our mission, I don't know if there's much of a difference between the two. So again, we know that humanity have been created in the image of God. I am made in the image of God. God's image is within me, as he is within you, as he is in with the rest of the world. And God views us all equally. But we can't say the same for maybe some of the systems that are in place that make people vulnerable. So then when it comes to day-to-day living, what are the decisions and the things that we can do that help us treat people justly, that help us really regard God's creation as what he intended it to be, within his image and equal to each other? Sometimes that actually can seem like too big a task, because it might involve changes in systems that are so deep and so embedded in our culture and in our communities that it might be really difficult to do. But there are small ways, and ways that are still there to empower us and to know that although they may seem small, it does make a big difference. Firstly, I would say that being conscious of where you shop is incredibly important. Are the clothes that you buy from places that are well known for their human rights standards, their fair trade, the quality of care for their workers, as well as the actual things you're buying themselves? That can be difficult, and sometimes there feels like there's a pressure, and sometimes it can just feel a bit more expensive, but it's important to not be ignorant to where our money goes in that respect. I try not to buy clothes too often anymore. There's a lot about the environment at the moment, and very importantly, and about fast fashion, but also just the humanity behind it. Who are making my clothes? Are they being paid fairly? Are there conditions of, and are there standards of working good, positive, actually where I would also want to work if I was doing that too? There are loads of brands out there that you can buy from if you're able to, but it's important not to feel guilty that if you can't, but access local charity shops when things are back to normal or a bit more normal. eBay, Depop, even things like that are really good things to use as a way that affects our day-to-day living. And it's not just clothes. Where do we buy our food? How do we buy our food? So are things all wrapped in plastic? What is that doing for the world and for the countries where they're going to get more affected by climate change more quickly? Are we buying things in single-use plastic that we don't need to be buying? Are we buying things that are also fairly traded? You know, can we buy the fair trade bananas rather than the ones that are in the bag that are maybe 20 pence cheaper? Can we just pay attention to what it is that we're doing and what it is that we're spending our time on and our money on in that respect? And don't be afraid to do a bit of research, and being prepared to have that conversation with parents or whoever's in charge of the food shop, and just talk a bit about what that might look like. Again, there are loads of brands out there that are really good and really clear about what it is they do. So you don't have to be too scared about searching for it, and it's something that you can do. And then, without it being about buying stuff, but just how are we around the people with us? When we do go outside and we see other people, what do we think of them? Do we look at them and do we go, oh man, what are they wearing? Or I can't believe they're out, or I'm not sure I like them because I remember them from school and they weren't very nice to me? Or do we see God in them, even if they don't see it in them themselves? Do we see the fact that God loves them and that they are still equal to God in his eyes as we are. And then how does that mindset begin to shift with how we treat one another? How do we regard the older person on the street who we know is alone? How can we still show them God's love in the right way? But how does that affect our day-to-day living? How can we be more patient maybe with some of our family? There are big things, big changes that we can make in regards to an impact of where we buy things and how we buy things that has a change to the rest of the world. But also when it comes to our day-to-day living, there are people that are a part of our lives each and every day. And it's maybe about refocusing who they are to God and the image they have been made in, and what that then needs to challenge us, how that needs to challenge us in how we regard them. God's justice is something that is so important, because I believe that once we look to and we begin to really unpack how God views us and how much he loves us, that isn't how much he loves, actually not even how much he loves us, how much he loves everybody. How can I not show love to maybe an actual neighbour or somebody that I don't really know that well, who isn't geographically a neighbour, but yeah, it can sound really easy, and there are times where it's going to be really difficult, but God is with us as we do that. And there might be times where we feel like we're vulnerable, and there are ways, for that support and help. Speak out, using social media for good, writing to the necessary people. Those are all really important things. I can list loads of day-to-day stuff that we could do that seem quite obvious, but actually are super important. Supporting the local food bank. If your parents are doing the food shop, or you're doing the food shop, put some more tins in there. If there's an opportunity to stand up for something or for someone, join the march or the rally or whatever it might be. But yeah, be bold in your convictions, and just know that God's justice is about restoration. It's about restoring his creation and restoring humanity. And he has done that through Jesus. Now the challenge for us is, how do we communicate that to the rest of the world? We can dream big. Definitely we can dream big, because God's spirit and God's power can do it. But also we can start small. How do I view my fellow human, my brother or my sister in Christ, or just this other person that I'm walking past at a safe 2 meters distance? How I view them as a part of God's creation within his image and equal to God is incredibly important. I really hope you've enjoyed my video on justice. I would really encourage you to watch the Bible Project video that they've also done on justice. That's a really good and much more in-depth video about God's justice and a lot of what I've said, but with really cool pictures and a bit more clever people behind it. But yeah, take some time, talk to God, ask for prompts, look for things around you that can really help you as you start to explore God's justice and how you have a part to play in making sure that it's realised and actualised. Thank you very much for listening. Please do make sure you are staying safe, that you're staying at home, and that you're looking after one another in this very different and difficult time.